As you're flipping over to 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is where we're going to spend really mostly all of our time together today. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. I just have a question for you. Have you ever eaten anything strange? Like, what's the strangest thing you have ever eaten? I'm reminded of whenever last year I went on a missions trip to Belize with Relevant Ministry, and great time there, but man, they have some different foods. And while we were there, it was like our first night. Me and Nelson, the founder of Relevant Ministry, we went to this Chinese restaurant. Later learned that you really don't want to eat the Chinese in Belize. But we went to this Chinese restaurant and we ordered a hamburger. And so this burger comes, and what were we thinking, ordering a hamburger at a Chinese? I don't know what we were thinking, but this burger comes and it looks all right, but then we start eating it and it's like, we don't even know what this is. Is this even beef? Is this a burger? It was just so strange. Weren't quite sure what it was, and it was just bizarre. Maybe you've eaten something strange. And then later we were at a restaurant. It was a different restaurant, but we were at a restaurant and they had like the specials for the day, and I actually got a picture of it. Here's a picture of the specials of the day, and I want you to notice one of the specials for the day was cow foot soup, okay? Cow foot soup. I don't know about you, but that's not what I'm ordering off the menu. Cow foot soup, oh my goodness. And maybe you've had that, I don't know. And then later, we were at one of the pastors, Pastor Ramon, his house, and his wife and his grown daughter, his adult daughter, they fixed us lunch or dinner, and they fixed us this nice meal, and they put it before us, and it was a little bit uncomfortable because what they do is they serve us, and then they don't even eat. They just watch us eat. And so as we're eating, they're sitting there watching us as we eat. And it's like, here's the thing, and I'll tell you, we enjoyed a lot of good food. I don't want you to get the idea that it was all bizarre. There was a lot of good food, and they served a good meal. But here's the thing, is that whenever you're there in their culture and they've prepared a meal for you, you eat it all, right? With a smile on your face, with gladness and gratitude, right? Why is that? Why do we eat it all? Well, it's because we don't want to come there and offend them. We don't want to come there and stomp on their culture. Like, here's the thing. We're there to bring a word from God, and they're like, hey, you're wanting me to consume and to receive the word that you're bringing about God? I want to see if you're willing to receive the meal that I've prepared and labored over. And so they just eagerly watch to see you enjoy the food that they eat. And now, do I have the right to refuse the food if it's something I don't like? Of course I have the right. But do I give up that right to eat something that maybe is not pleasant in order to build that relationship? Absolutely. This is really a basic thing in sharing your faith. Or evangelism or missions, or really living in a world with unbelievers. It's contextualization. It's bringing the message into their culture, and you have to build a relationship with people so that they will hear you. Now, we have really the same thing in the South. If you go to Big Mama's house and she cooked you a big meal, you don't get to say, she brings you a chicken fried steak, you don't get to say, oh, I'm a vegetarian. You're not a vegetarian today. You just became a carnivore because Big Mama made you a chicken fried steak and you are going to eat it or else, right? It's like, oh, I don't like broccoli. I'm sorry, you like broccoli today, right? Because she prepared this for you. And in an effort to not put a stumbling block between us, to not offend them, to not put this resistance and this wall up, we are going to partake in something. We're going to lay down a right, lay down a liberty in order to build a bridge to those people. What this is really incarnational living. Incarnational living. Now, maybe you know about the incarnation. It's where Jesus, God, came down and put on human flesh in order to be with us. He entered in our world. And so incarnational living is whenever we go and enter people's world in order to reach them. We see the example of Jesus doing this in Philippians chapter 2. I'm just going to read this quickly, and then we're going to jump into 1 Corinthians. But Philippians chapter 2, verse 5 says, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped or a thing to be used to his own advantage. But he emptied himself by taking on the form of a servant. Being born in the likeness of men and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross." What we see here is that Jesus, being God, he left heaven and put on the constraints of human flesh and humbled himself to enter into our world in order to reach us and save us. And what we see in the example of Jesus is that we have got to go as far as it takes to adopt the culture and reach people for Christ. To adopt the culture and reach people for Christ. Or adapt to the culture. There's one pastor that said this: "Do everything short of sin in order to reach people far from God." Now, I don't know what you believe about that, but here's what he's getting at is, I'm willing to adapt myself to the people around me in order to reach them for God, as long as it doesn't cause me to sin. The problem is, though, that many of us make our rights and our liberties the most important thing in our life. It's the most important thing. It's more important. Our rights and our ability to vocalize and voice our opinions and do what we think we should do, and more important than relationships. I'm willing to alienate people and push people back in order to... It's more important than our health. It's more important... Here's the scary thing. It's more important than the mission of God to many of us. That by our words and our deeds, we are alienating people who disagree with us. Again, someone else said that the only thing that should offend people about your life is the gospel. The only thing that should offend people about your life is the gospel. And I know in our culture today, it's almost impossible to not offend people. But what he's saying is that as far as it depends on me, the gospel is offensive enough. And I don't want to get in the way of the gospel's work, and so I'm going to do whatever I can to adapt to their culture. My concern, growingly, as this pandemic is continuing, my concern in observing Christian behavior is that we are unnecessarily alienating people from the kingdom of God with our strong expression of our biased political views and coronavirus opinions. I think that for the sake of our liberty, we are pushing people away from receiving Jesus. We really need to ask ourselves, am I so much of a Republican that I would not be able to or have the opportunity to share the gospel with a Democrat? Am I so much of a Democrat that I don't have the opportunity or would be able to share the gospel with a Republican? Am I so set on my side of things that I am unwilling and don't even have the opportunity to share the gospel with someone who disagrees with me? I really want to encourage us all to not let our opinions get in the way of someone coming to Christ. Now, you might ask, man, does the Bible have to have anything to say about that? Does the Bible say anything about this? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked. That's why we go to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, we see Paul doing this very thing where he is adapting his rights. He is laying down his liberties in order to reach people for Christ. So if you're in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, I hope you are, if you have a Bible, and we're going to start in verse 19. He says this, "For though I am free from all," this is the Apostle Paul writing to the church at Corinth, verse 19, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being under the law myself, that I might win those under the law. To those outside of the law I became as one outside of the law, not being outside of the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside of the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings." Look at verse 24. "Do you not know that all run a race? All the runners run, but only one receives the prize. So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." That last passage you might think is unrelated or a separate topic, but I'm going to show you at the end how it all plays right in together so beautifully. But here's kind of the main idea of the sermon today. If you take away one thing, this is what I want you to take away. That our love limits our liberties. That our love for God and our love for others limits our liberties. Look at verse 19. "For though I am free from all," is he free? He's free. He's free from all. "I have made myself a servant to all." Maybe your translation says a slave. That's even stronger language. "I'm a slave or a servant to all, that I might win the more of them." What is he saying? That I'm free, but I'm willing to lay down my freedom, become a servant to all, so that they might come to know Christ. What we see here is that Paul's main motivation in life, Paul's main mission in life is winning people for Christ. He filters everything he says, he filters everything he does, he filters every decision through this mission. Is this going to help me win people to Jesus? And I just have to ask us, what is our motivation? What is your motivation? Are you filtering your words and your deeds through the filter of your mission in life? We just see, "Though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all." Why? That I might win the more of them. This word "win" is a word that means gain. It's a financial term that means it means to turn a profit. It's this idea that there was gain for my effort. I worked really hard, and then there was gain, winnings, profit for my effort. And so what he's saying is that I'm spending my life, I am working hard, I am disciplined in my life in order to win people for Jesus. Paul had a passion to see people saved. And I just think that maybe this should be our passion. This should be our mission. But here's the thing. Before we can win the hearts of people, we must first win their ears to hear the message of Jesus. So before we can win their hearts with the gospel, we have to first win their ears. We have to first get their attention. And so we have to be willing to adapt our lives and limit our liberties in order to reach people for Jesus. Now you might say, well, that sounds like compromise to me. I'm not a compromiser. I'm for the truth. I don't disagree with you. I don't think we should compromise. I don't think the Bible's asking us to compromise. Are you saying we should just compromise to gain an audience? No, that's not what I'm saying. It's not what I'm saying. I'm not telling you to sell out, okay? What does it mean to sell out? It means to like give up really important things in order to gain somebody's attention or somebody's approval. We're not going to sell out, but I am going to ask you to go all out, okay? That we are to go all out in our life. See, selling out is setting aside a truth that we must obey. That's selling out. Setting aside a truth we must obey. But going all out is setting aside a right or a liberty or a freedom in an effort to adapt to people in order to reach them for Jesus Christ. That's the difference between selling out and going all out. It's incarnational living like Jesus. Incarnate, he came to be with us, to enter our world. We are to go and enter the world of others right where they are in order to reach them as well. Incarnational living, entering their world. That means that if I have a friend who's lost a loved one, you know what my attitude and emotion towards them is? It's one of grief, one of sorrow, one of sympathy. I go and I hold them and I weep with them and I join them in their grief. But then if I have someone else who they just had a baby and I go to the hospital room and boy, it's a celebration, it's joy, it's happiness, it's that kind of thing. Like we adapt to the situation, to the people where they are. Here's the reality of life is that we have to reach people differently with different methods. We reach different people differently with different methods. The content remains the same. We are preaching the truth. We are preaching the gospel. We're not compromising truth. The content of the gospel remains the same, but the communication method can change. The communication method can change. I mean, just think about it. We changed. We pivoted really quickly, didn't we? Our communication method before was in-person gatherings, preaching from the stage. You know, everybody gathered, and praise the Lord for that. And I'm excited to come back to that. But we pivoted because we had to reach people in a different way. And now our message is the same. Our method is a little bit different, reaching people online the way we are. Does this describe you? Does this describe you? Being willing to lay down your liberties to love and serve and reach people for Christ? Being willing to adapt your lifestyle to those who don't yet know Christ? Does this describe you? Are you willing to set aside your personal preference and every non-essential aspect and every convenience in order to maximize your ability to reach those who are lost? Does that describe you? Well, I hope by the end of this sermon we would all be challenged with this. And we would all take this from the Word of God and say, I'm going to lay down my liberties. I'm going to limit my liberties for love. Love limits our liberties. So we must adapt. And what are we going to adapt to? Well, here's some things that we see in the text. The first thing is we must adapt to the customs of others. We must adapt to the customs of others. Look at verse 20. To the Jews I became a Jew in order to win Jews. To a Jew I became a Jew in order to win the Jews. Now this is talking about their customs, their culture, their ethnicity. It's not talking about the religion of Judaism. It's talking about their customs, their culture. Now, Paul was a Jew. And so it just kind of speaks to the fact at how much Paul had removed himself. He had jumped so far onto this Jesus thing that whenever he went to go reach the Jews, he had to go and become a Jew in order to reach the Jews, enter into their own customs. Or we could say to the Romans, I became a Roman. To the Canadians, I became a Canadian. I'm not saying you have to talk like a Canadian. But to the Mexicans, I became Mexican. To the Louisianians, I became one of them, right? So we are to become all things to all people in order to win. We must adapt to the customs of others. Well, how are you going to adapt to their customs? You adapt to their customs in order to connect with them. And so, like I said earlier, it might mean eating their food. And you don't necessarily have an appetite for that, and you might not necessarily want to eat that, right? But I'm going to eat it in order to connect with them. Maybe it means wearing the clothes of the people and connecting with them in their the way they dress. So back to Belize. So we're in Belize, and our last day, we're going into Mexico. We were going to drive into Mexico to spend some time at a church there right across the border. And so we're in Belize. We're in this truck, in the back seat of this truck, and we're getting very close to Mexico, and Nelson leans over to me kind of quietly in my ear and says, "Hey, can you take your earring out?" And I was like, well, that's a little bizarre. Like, we've been in Belize for a week, and he's just now talking to me about my earring. Now, I have an earring. Okay, now, this isn't no statement or anything like that. Like, I got it when I was 8 years old, okay? So blame my parents if you want to. But I've just always kept it in. I got this gauged earring. Anyways, I hope it's not a stumbling block for you. But he says, "Hey, can you take your earring out?" And I said, "Sure, what's up?" And he said, "Well, they told us that that would be a stumbling block for them in Mexico. Belize, they're kind of okay with it in Belize, but in Mexico, that would be a distraction. That would be a hindrance. Can you take that out while we're in Mexico? You can put it right back in when we get back into Belize." And I said, "Absolutely." So I took it out and put it in my pocket or whatever, and went into Mexico, had a great time. I'm glad I did, because I was preaching. I preached that night, and it was just a good time there. But what he's saying is that there's, in their custom, like some of the things that are on your body or piercings or clothing that you need to adapt in order to reach them and not to be a stumbling block to them. And maybe it means changing up your activities or learning the things that they like to do. And hey, I don't necessarily enjoy doing that, but you like to do that, and I'm trying to reach you, so I'm going to be into that too. And what this means is it's entering into their world is what it's about. Entering into their world. And so we adapt to the customs of others and then the ceremonies of others. Look at verse 20 again. "To the Jew I became as a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being under the law myself, that I might win those under the law." And so this is the customs, the ceremonies of others. Who is he talking about, these under the law people? These are most likely religiously dedicated Jews or proselytes. Proselytes are people who are trying to become Jews in their religion. And so these are very dedicated law people. Take very seriously their religion, take very seriously the commands of the religion in Judaism. They had 613 different commands that they were to adhere to, and so they were under the law. So Paul's saying, I'm not under the law. What he's not saying is that he's a lawless person. He's saying, I'm not under the law of Moses. I'm under the law of Christ. But he says, even though I'm not under those things, I'm going to take them on so that I can be alongside of these people that I'm trying to reach. Well, I guess what we see here is that we have the liberty to take on certain customs and certain codes and of behavior and such. We can take on some of those things, not in order to gain forgiveness or salvation, but in order to express gratitude to the Lord, in order to reach people for Jesus. Like, we can take on some things, but here's the thing. We are not at liberty for us to impose those non-essential gray area things as a requirement. We can't impose these things as a requirement for others to be saved or to be right with God or to be close to God. Like we can take these on personally, but we have no right to impose those on others as a requirement. And so kind of a very classic example is drinking. The Bible does not condemn drinking alcohol. It does condemn drunkenness. And we can get into the differences and all of that. We don't have time for that today. But if you're a Christian, you can choose not to drink, to abstain. That might be a wise thing because of the dangers of drunkenness. So you can choose to abstain, but you cannot impose your choice to abstain on others as like, if you want to be spiritually mature, you must abstain too. If you really want to be holy, you must abstain too, because the Bible does not condemn it. It condemns drunkenness, but we cannot make our personal preferences equal to God's program. We cannot make our personal convictions equal with God's commandments, okay? We just can't. But, so we can take on some restrictions in our life, especially if we want to reach others. We see Paul did this with Timothy in Acts chapter 16. Paul recruits Timothy to be on his missionary team, and his plan is to go and travel around, and he goes first to the Jew and then to the Gentile, so he knows he's going to be trying to reach Jewish people. But Timothy, his mom was a Jew, but his dad was a Greek, and he was uncircumcised. And that would have been a major stumbling block for the Jewish people. And so Paul's like, hey, if you're going to join my team and we're going to try to reach Jewish people, I don't want us to be out at the public, or not the public, but out at the bath pool, and we're all showering, and they see that you're not circumcised, and then they feel like they don't want to receive anything from us. We've got to get this taken care of. Now, Timothy does it. Now, it wasn't the law. They just earlier settled that you didn't have to be circumcised to be a Christian. But he does it. He lays down his right, his liberty, out of love to reach the Jews. And man, that is dedication for a man, isn't it? That's some dedication. Timothy, quite dedicated to the mission. In Acts chapter 18, verse 18, we see that Paul had taken probably a Nazirite vow, where it was a restriction, a restricted diet and restricted behavior and restrictions on his hair and all that kind of stuff. He had taken on this Nazirite vow, not because he had to. It wasn't a requirement to be a Christian, but because he wanted to join them so that he could reach them. Now here's the thing. Paul never compromised the truth. He never compromised the truth. But he was willing to accommodate non-essential beliefs in order to gain their attention, in order to build a bridge and relate to them. So he's not compelled to do these things by the law. He's not like saying, oh, I'm obligated to do it. He's not saying that. He's compelled by love. He's compelled by love. It's amazing. Maybe you have friends or a family member who observes ceremonies that you know are not necessary for salvation or godliness. And instead of telling them how wrong they are, what if you just joined them in order to win them? Kind of a practical thing would be, maybe you have a friend or a family member who observes Lent and doesn't eat meat on Fridays, and they eat fish on Fridays. How about whenever you go to lunch with them on those Fridays during Lent, instead of you ordering a cheeseburger and them ordering catfish, and just saying, you don't have to do that, that's not required, that's man-made. Like, instead of doing that, what if you just ordered catfish too, so that you're not putting up a stumbling block for them, you're not putting up a wall between them, but you're building a bridge in order to reach them. I'm not asking you to violate your conscience. Don't violate your conscience. If God has convicted you of something, if you feel like you can't quite adapt in that area, I'm not asking you to violate your conscience, but if you can't adapt, I just step down. Just step down. Don't say anything about it. Don't participate in it. Just step down and try to prevent yourself from being a distraction to them. So their ceremonies, adapt to their ceremonies and adapt to the limitations of others. Look at verse 22. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. Who's he talking about here? Who are these weak people? There's different speculation on who exactly he's talking about here. Maybe these are people with overly sensitive consciences, like everything is convicting them, can't do anything. Maybe this is the legalist, right? So every law you are breaking and you can't do that and you can't do this. Maybe they're weak in the sense that they are overly legalist. Maybe he's talking here about maybe the lower educated people who don't quite understand everything that's going on. Maybe it's someone who's simple-minded. We're not quite sure, but to the weak I became weak. I met them in their limitations, okay? So if I am the stronger Christian, I'm going to reduce to the weakness in order to meet them where they are and reach them. It's like if me and Darren and I, if we were carrying an ice chest together. So we have this big ice chest. If you don't know Darren, as he led us worship, Darren owns a CrossFit gym, and so he's kind of buff, and I haven't done things in the gym for a while, and so I'm not quite as buff as Darren. And so Darren and I, we go to fill this ice chest up with ice. Darren can clearly carry a lot more weight than I can because he's stronger than me. I'm the weaker one in this story, if you haven't noticed. And so we're filling this thing up with ice. How much ice should we put in the ice chest? Well, you fill it up to the capacity of the weaker person, don't you? Because we got to carry this together. And so, although he can lift more, he's going to reduce his capacity in order to meet me where I am so that we can do this thing together. And that's the idea, that if I am the stronger person, if I am the stronger Christian, I am willing to limit myself, limit my rights, limit my understanding, so that I can meet them where they are in order to reach them. It's meeting people on the level that they're at, not requiring them to come up to your level. All right? And then we must adapt to the liberties of others. Verse 21, to those outside of the law, I became as one outside of the law, though not being outside of the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside of the law. And so if the legalist, you have the legalist who's like overly, there's so many limitations because there's overly sensitive conscience. The law, those outside of the law are the grace people, okay? This is, I can do anything. I have liberty to do anything because I'm under grace and not under the law of God. And so what he's saying here is there's no religion imposed on my freedoms, no religious systems, no religious rules are going to be imposed on my freedoms. I'm a free spirit. No systems can control me. All right, these are the people who rebel for the sake of rebelling. And but here's the thing. He's like, I'm even going to meet them where they are. And did you know that there are some things that you don't need to do in order to have a vibrant relationship with God? Did you know that? Like, there's some things that it's okay that you don't do. You don't need many of the rituals that we feel are very necessary for spiritual vibrance, but there's actually some health in having some freedom and not restricting so much. And so some people are overly free, is what he's saying, but I'm willing to even adapt to them and not cause them to have to put themselves under all the restrictions that I feel are necessary, but meet them where they are. And Paul He was an expert at this. He was great at contextualization. He was great at incarnational living, meeting people where they were. When he went to Athens and he went in there, and there's so many gods that they worshipped, and it was just crazy, but they very intellectual and debating philosophy and all of those things. And Paul went in there, and when he started his message, he did not quote the Bible. Can you believe that? How dare Paul? This is in Acts chapter 17. Paul at Mars Hill, okay? He did not quote the Bible. You know what he quoted? He quoted their own philosophers. Why did he do that? He quoted their own philosophers in order to get the message of the gospel across to them in a way that they understood it. And so I guess really the whole point of all of this is that we don't have to require everybody to come to our level of Christianity, whatever that is. But we should be willing to adapt to where people are in order to best have the opportunity to reach them. Our love limits our liberties. How do we do this? Very quickly, in the last verses, verse 24 through 27, how do we do this? He says, "Do you not know that all runners run in the race, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises what? Self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beat in the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others I should be disqualified myself." What is he saying here? He's saying, hey, this thing of adapting and limiting your liberties for the sake of others and adapting to where they are, this is going to take discipline, right, and self-control. And so he's like, we're on a mission. We're on a mission. We're running. We are moving forward to somewhere. And that mission is to reach people with the gospel. And if I'm going to stay laser focused and be effective in that mission, I have got to be willing to self-control myself, to discipline myself. He says to beat my bodies. Isn't that what he says? He says, but I discipline my body, and I beat my body into control. Here's what he doesn't say. He says, I discipline my body and bring it into submission. He doesn't say, I discipline their body to bring them into submission. That's a key difference. He says, I discipline myself to bring myself into submission. I don't discipline them to bring them into submission. Again, he's talking about reaching people far from God. And so quite frankly, some of you need to exercise some self-control in what you post on social media. You need to control yourself. Some of your politically biased Facebook posts are hindering people who disagree with you from coming to salvation. What he's saying is that if there's anything in me that'll keep people from coming to Jesus, I'm going to control that thing. I'm going to self-control, discipline that thing. This isn't an issue of whether you're right or wrong. It's about reaching people for Jesus. 1 Corinthians 8, chapter 8, verse 9 says, "But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak." We have rights, we have freedoms. You can do those things. You can do whatever you want to do. What I'm saying is maybe the best thing for the mission of God is for us to control ourselves, for us to limit our liberties in order to reach those who are far from God. Although we are free, our love for God and our love for others and our commitment to the mission of God limits our liberties. So, here's the thing. You have an immediate opportunity to practice this. You have an immediate opportunity to practice this, or a very soon opportunity to practice this. And that is next week at church. At church next week. Although I'm so excited to come back together, and it's going to be a great time in the house of the Lord with you all. Some things are going to be a little bit different. And so as we come in, we're going to have hand sanitizer stations. We're encouraging you to wear a mask. And if you don't have a mask, we will have masks available for you here. We are social distancing. We have put a space between the rows of chairs so that there can be a proper social distancing in the sanctuary. And we're asking that your family all sit on one row, that one family per row. And if you have a big family, take 2 rows, but no more than one family per row. And we're asking that if you're sick, that you would stay home and just watch online. If you're not ready to come back, just stay home and watch online. And all of those things. We're not going to have kids ministry for a little while because it's impossible to really get kids to social distance and all of that. And so things are going to be a little bit different. And we are exercising some precautions in wisdom in order to be able to gather together. But I read this pretty remarkable quote from the editor of the Gospel Coalition. He said this. He said, "Even if you think these precautions are a needless overreaction, can you not sacrifice your ideal for a season out of the love for others who believe that these precautions are necessary?" Is it okay if I read that again? I thought it was so good. Even if you think these precautions are a needless overreaction, can you not sacrifice your ideal for a season out of love for others who believe these precautions are necessary? Look, here's the thing. Wearing a mask, who would have thought that this little thing here would become such a controversial item of attire and whatever? But it is. But here's the thing. Wearing a mask is not a statement about its effectiveness. When you wear this, you're not saying you think this is protecting you. And it's not a political statement, okay? Wearing a mask is a statement about your love for others who feel that it's necessary. That's what it's about. It's about my love for others. You know, they say that these masks don't really protect you all that well. It protects other people from getting anything that you might have. And so if all of us are wearing them, then that's the most protection you can have. And again, this is not a statement about its effectiveness. We all have very differing opinions about how this whole thing, we should respond to all of this. I get that. It's a statement about my love for others. I think, now this is just my own personal opinion, but I think that if Paul was here today, in the thing that we're going through right now, he would say, I wore a mask in order to reach those who felt that it was necessary. I think he would wear it out of love for others. So let's keep our mind on the mission. It's not about my personal preference. It's about reaching people for Christ, even if it means limiting my liberties, okay? Our love limits our liberties. Let's pray. Father, I just pray, God, that even this sermon wouldn't be a stumbling block to us, Lord, but that we would receive from your word the clear teaching that we should be mission-minded first and filter our actions and our deeds through that mission. And if my actions, if my words, if my opinions are going to hinder the mission, I will surrender those things. Lord, I thank you for the opportunity we're going to have real soon to gather. And I pray that it would be a sweet time in your house, but that we would all be willing to participate together in order to get through this in a safe and healthy way. So Lord, I pray that your Spirit would seal these words in us, and that your word would not return void, but accomplish the purposes for which you've sent, and that we would think about these things and live these things as we leave here today. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Hey, so next week, Sunday, right here, May 31st, we're still going to be meeting online as well, but we'll meet in person right here. If you want to go and get all the details about our reopening plan and what we're doing and what we're kind of asking you to do, just go to BayouTalla.com/updates, and there you can find everything you need. Okay? Thank you, church. I love you, and I will see you next week.